The 7-3 Minnesota Vikings take on the 3-6 Denver Broncos. And I think the biggest question for the Vikings coming into this game is, can Minnesota finally conquer their arch nemesis known as the backup quarterback? Because I introduced to you one Brandon Allen, who 2 weeks ago made his first career start in a win against the Cleveland Browns. And I don't think we really know what to expect from Brandon Allen and the Broncos offense because, simply put, there's not a lot of film on this guy. But the one thing that does stick out is he is a mobile quarterback. He can use his legs. He's pretty fast, and he can extend plays by getting outside the pocket, whether it's running for a first down or extending plays for the coverage to break down. We're talking about a one-game sample size, but still he's a mobile quarterback. But even prior to Brandon Allen, the passing game has been absolutely putrid, who, for the sake of John Elway, I hope that Drew Lock, their rookie draft pick this year, I hope Drew Lock works out for them because they've gone through quarterback carousel for the last several years, but their offensive line has struggled all year long. So I would think advantage goes to the Minnesota Vikings defensive line, who really needs a bounce-back performance after the last 2 weeks. Now, I did see that Linval Joseph and Shamar Stephen, they both did not participate in Wednesday's practice, so that's something to keep an eye out for. But it's not like the Broncos don't have weapons to work with. They have a pretty nice run game led by Phillip Lindsay, who's averaging nearly 5 yards a carry. And then when it comes to their receiving weapons, I'm really only looking at two, one primary and one sneaky. Courtland Sutton is the one legit wide receiver that you have to worry about. Focus on Courtland Sutton. And the one sneaky receiver to worry about is Noah Fant, their tight end. And I say that because he's had kind of an up and down year, but he did have a good game in Brandon Allen's first start against the Cleveland Browns. And the reason why I say sneaky is because young, inexperienced quarterbacks, they tend to rely on tight ends as a safety blanket. So you got to look out for that. And the reason why I keep emphasizing the passing game or opposing offenses passing game is because week after week after week, the cornerbacks of the Minnesota Vikings, they look more and more like a liability. And I'm talking about every single last cornerback on this roster. And I don't want to hear anything about Xavier Rhodes over the last 2 weeks. He's looked good because I wouldn't even say that. He just hasn't seen the targets that other guys have seen the last 2 weeks. Think about this. All season long, prior to Kansas City's game at Arrowhead, Vikings at Arrowhead, quarterbacks consistently picked on Xavier Rhodes. Well, the last 2 weeks, other cornerbacks have gotten picked on by quarterbacks. Mike Hughes last week against the Dallas Cowboys saw 15 targets. 15. You compare that to Xavier Rhodes, who saw 5 and still gave up 4 catches for 66 yards. Then the week prior to that against the Kansas City Chiefs, Trey Wayne saw 11 targets. You compare that to Xavier Rhodes, who saw 4. So he is not, I wouldn't even say that he's had a good game. He just hasn't seen the targets that other guys have seen recently. But I would say I would give a slight advantage and really, if the secondary was on point, this wouldn't even be a question. I think the Vikings defense would dominate, but I would give a slight edge to the Vikings defense in this matchup. You've got an inexperienced quarterback with a very shaky offensive line. You've got weapons to worry about. If you can contain Phillip Lindsay and just try to minimize whatever damage that Courtland Sutton will do, then I think the edge will go to the Vikings defense. Then when you look at the Broncos defense, this defense is legit, man, led by head coach Vic Fangio. They've got some players. I mean, Von Miller and Derek Wolfe, they can wreak havoc at any point in time. But the one matchup that I'm looking forward to seeing the most is Chris Harris Jr. versus Stephon Diggs, especially assuming that Adam Thielen is going to be out again. I'm very looking forward to seeing that matchup and how he does. But I think it's very important because of this defense that we're going up against, which basically is the equivalent of the Chicago Bears. The makeup of this team and how they work, their defense compared to their offense, is kind of like the AFC version of the Chicago Bears, that I would say the primary target, the primary factor that the Vikings need to focus on is that Dalvin Cook needs to get off to a hot start immediately, because if he doesn't, then that puts all the pressure and puts all the load on Kirk Cousins' shoulders, who has looked good. But if Dalvin Cook gets held in check like he did 2 weeks ago at Arrowhead, then it could spell a disaster, especially not just Chris Harris Jr. that you have to worry about. You also have to worry about Kareem Jackson, who's played well, and Justin Simmons. They really have probably one of the best 1-2 punch safeties in the entire NFL. And Justin Simmons, he's probably, not even probably, he should make the Pro Bowl, but he probably may be an all-pro safety this year. So that's a vaunted defense that the Denver Broncos have. So I understand they're a 3-6 team, but this is the very definition of a trap game, and here's why. We're the Minnesota Vikings. We just walked into AT&T Stadium last week, Jerry World, and kicked the Dallas Cowboys' ass. Granted, it came down to a Hail Mary to stop it, but we just went out there and whooped their ass against all odds. Sunday Night Football, everybody but America voted for the Cowboys to win that game. And Skip Bayless, he's pissed off. And have you seen the power rankings lately on ESPN? We're like number 7 now. Hey, we're hot shit now. We're the Vikings. We're the big bad Vikings. We are hot shit. We're about to run the rest of the table for this schedule. This makes up for a trap game because if you're not on your P's and Q's, then all of a sudden you can get your block knocked off. So I think the Vikings should win. However, I did make a promise to say I'm not going to make an official prediction because I just don't know what to expect with this team. However, if the coaching staff, if they perform to the best of their capabilities, if the players, if they perform to the best of their capabilities, I still think it will be a tough matchup because that defense is so good. It's not going to be a cakewalk at all. But I think because of the inexperience of the offensive line with Brandon Allen, or not the offensive line, the offense with Brandon Allen and with the shaky offensive line, I think the Vikings should win this game, especially being at home. We'll see. We do this 3 times a week. Mediocre at Best Sports Podcast with Realistic Randy. Check me out on Twitter at realistic_Randy, Facebook at Realistic Randy. The next podcast will be on Monday, reacting to the result of the Vikings versus Broncos game. Enjoy the game, folks. We'll see you then.